Okay, wonderful. So we're going to begin. This is John Freeman. I'm the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. We are here on Thursday, September 2nd with another episode of our Ann Arbor Solar Stories. I'm your host this evening. We have a great lineup this evening with Ernesto, who's going to talk about his challenges in installing solar in Ann Arbor and dealing with city government on the issue of the placement of solar panels in the front yard, side yard, or the backyard. Solar Stories is sponsored by the Michigan Energy Office, by McNaughton and McKay, by Iron Ridge Racking, by Harvest Solar. And I think that's it. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll have a 30-minute presentation or so by Ernesto, and then we'll have open it up for questions. And the key takeaway this evening is learning how to work with local units of governments, because this is a universal lesson that many of us either have had to deal with or will have to work with in the future. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ernesto Figueroa, and we're very honored to have him join us and to present his solar story. Ernesto, take it away, sir.
All right, John, thank you very much for your introduction. As you said, my name is Ernesto Figueroa, and I want to tell you about, well, thanks for the invitation to share this story. I'm interested in promoting solar, as all of you are. And if my story can be of any help to do that, I'm glad to contribute. So our story started around 2016 with our intent to install solar panels in our home. And I'll show you right away the first slide, which is a terrific aerial view of our home. It's in the, in the south of Stadium, and just a couple of blocks from York. And I'll explain a little bit, so on the right side of the screen, it's just the large, you see the sidewalk, and a large, that's our front yard. Then there's the house to the left, which is in an angle. You see the driveway to the left of the house. The house is straight, line up. So the long axis of the house is lined up north to south. And the short axis along the driveway is east to west. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any moment. I don't mind at all. And then one more, and I hope to learn myself from this, from this presentation and what you guys may have thoughts you may have. Anyways, so on the south side of the house, you see an array. There's two lines of solar panels. There's 4 on the top and then 6 on the bottom. Right, 3 feet from that array, we had a beautiful, beautiful English butternut tree that must have been 80 to 100 years old. It was a little jewel from the Audubon Society that would bring members every year to visit the tree, and they would measure it. The tree was upwards of 70 feet tall, and it shaded all the south side of the house, shaded the patio. So really, we had all where you see the solar panels now. It was pretty much all shaded. So we had really no option to put solar panels on the roof. And so my plan, was to install and the only other place that allowed for solar panel installation was the front yard. And you can see on the front yard, there's a big area that is kind of relatively bare alongside the sidewalk that receives it receives quite a bit of sunlight year round. So I started working with you may guys be familiar with David Frederick from I think it's Home Solar, and we plan to install the 12 and a half 13 kilowatt array in the front yard. I'm quite attuned to aesthetic concerns, so I didn't want to put an eyesore in my front yard. So I had a plan to put a privacy fence around the 2 rows of solar panels, and then cover it with with a hedge to make it practically invisible from the street. And we set out to do this, and we got the permit. The city gave us the permit. And I had approached my neighbors, and I had said, hey, this is what I'm planning to do. I showed them drawings about, what I had in mind, how I was planning to make it so private and not an eyesore, and everything seemed to be fine. And when we were about ready to install the array, we got a notice from the city that this was being delayed, that this was going to be sort of reviewed by their the group at City Council that approves these systems, and we learned that there was really opposition from the neighbors was mounting, and it became quite loud. So it became a very, very large organized group that began to work with approaching members of City Council to stop the installation in the front yard. This was debated. First, we started with, I can't remember, the Energy Commission. I think they're the first to approve this. So they were the first to kind of review what we wanted to do and make a recommendation. They actually made a recommendation. They decided to pass it on to City Council. And we went through a number of hearings where, my wife and I were present, and this large group of neighbors that was in opposition to the array. And it was long, drawn-out process that lasted several months, and which culminated with City Council almost unanimously deciding that solar arrays would not be allowed in front yards across the city. But they, part of the same ordinance that was that they would allow solar panel installations in side yards and in backyards, and using the same sort of rules that govern, the installation of other structures like a shed, a garage, or any. And that's really the law of the land right now in Ann Arbor. So no solar panels in front yards, side yards, and backyards can be used for solar panel installation. As I said, this was a long and drawn out, struggle in City Hall. And while this was happening, our beautiful butternut tree, which had was struck by lightning. And it was weakened to the point that really was no longer safe to have it over the house. Our master bedroom was right under one of the main branches of the tree. It had three major limbs, and one of the limbs was lost with the lightning. The other two went. They were just the base of the tree was weakened, and we had to take it down. So while we were struggling with City Hall, at the same time, and the possibility of installing solar panels in our roof became available, and that's how we ended up with this kind of patchy array, trying to make use of as much roof as we can. You see on this slide that there's, the panels that are further to the right are facing east. So you get the morning sun, the noontime sun, very little of the afternoon sun. The two groups of panels to the left of the screen are both facing south. They work quite beautifully in the spring before the leaves, before the trees get their leaves. Really, the production is quite robust. In the fall, as the sun comes down, especially late fall, as the sun comes down, there's trees on the south side, that begin to create some shade. And until those leaves are gone, we get kind of a less robust kind of production. This is another aerial view, and this time is nicely lined up. On the vertical axis is north-south. On the horizontal axis is east on the right, and left and west on the left. And if you walk around, one of the things that we loved about the panels, this is the house, is that the panels were really hidden out of view, which was kind of turned out to be a blessing. So you kind of, when you approach the house from the street, the panels are completely out of view. And then as you walk around, that's the group of panels that is higher up at a fairly steep angle. I believe it's about 45 degrees. As you keep walking around, you see those two sets of panels, and then there you see better. The house from the back is a bit quirky. We did three, but you can see the array. We're tremendously pleased and satisfied with what we did. I'm showing here, I'm sure you all know, this is the app that gives me information about the panels in my phone. That's the home screen. This is what we've our production starting in August of 2017, and the first 2 months, it was connected just for a few days. It's a 8.5 kilowatt array, the whole array, and you can see here the peak in 2018 in June. That one day, that 1 month, we got to collect 1.2 kilowatts. And then the final slide, this is the production for this year, right? So so kind of in big strokes, that's kind of been our story.
Well,
So Ernesto, I think your graph showed the production in megawatts, not kilowatts.
Yes, I'm sorry. Correct. You're right.
So you almost produced 1.2 megawatts in June of
Yeah,
a year ago.
that's right.
And in May, June, July, and August, you produced essentially, with a couple exceptions, 1 megawatt.
Pretty close, right? Yep. And our lifetime production since the end of 2017 has been 31, almost 32 megawatts. So for an array that is a bit patchy, I mean, we really had to sort of improvise to put those panels. They are not in the optimal angles. I'm quite pleased with the way it has performed.
So the slide you're showing right now is production for,
2021.
okay, why is it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? What
Yeah,
happened? January, February?
yeah. Somehow the app was disconnected from the Wi-Fi those 2 months.
All right.
So I don't have that data.
But we can extrapolate that it's over 6 and under, over 0.6, under 0.8 probably.
Right. Actually, I can, if you want to, I can actually tell you that I have the app open here. Right. So
I got a question. Are you tied to the grid?
go ahead.
Ernesto, are you tied to the grid?
I am tied to the grid. Yes.
Yep.
So your electricity, when you produce more than you need, goes to DTE, and in the wintertime, if you produce less than you need, they credit you.
well, you draw from the credits.
Right.
Right. You're drawing from the credit.
Yes. And I know it's not relevant anymore, but I was grandfathered into net metering.
Yeah, me too.
Yep. And
2 years-
actually, I don't know,
2 years-
you may know, we're selling the house, we're downsizing. Does the net metering transfer to the new owners or it gets lost?
It's a good question. I have the same question because I think I'm going to move in the next 2 years. And I've been up 2 years less than you.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll find out. But my gut tells me that it's 10 years from when the system was installed.
Right.
So since you're not going to take the system with you, I would like to believe that it will continue with the new owners until the 10 years is up from the time it was installed. But I don't know for a fact that, so we'll have to look into it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if
Are
Mark
they-
Peavy may
Are they
know.
both DTE? Are you both? the
Yes, I am
DTE?
DTE.
Thank you.
Yeah, me too.
So I have a question. It sounds like your neighbors were the ones that, even after you talked about putting up a fence and putting up a hedge, it sounds like your neighbors were the one that went to City Hall because the City Hall gave you a permit initially.
Right.
And then after the neighbors spoke up, the politicians decided to look into it. Did that cause any permanent bad blood between you and your neighbors, or how did that how did you finesse that, or have you?
You know, we've had a cordial relationship with that, with that particular neighbor, but not particularly friendly either. That time was, things were a bit more tense. But we continue to maintain a cordial relationship.
So
Um,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, my follow-up question is this. Your proposal was to put the panels in the front yard in a ground mount system because of the tree was covering your roof with shade. If you had proposed to put the panels in the front on the roof, would that been okay?
Yeah,
Okay, so it was just a ground mount system that was the
Correct.
problem.
right. So my house would have been on the other side of the street, and the roof was facing south, and I wanted to put panels on the roof, it would have been no problem.
Right.
Yeah. And you know, there were all kinds of, some objections raised. Some people are, you know, they argue that, you know, that it was dangerous to have solar panels, that electricity at the ground level. I mean, what about if a kid were to come by and touch the panels? And the strongest argument really was aesthetic, that they wanted, that the aim was to preserve the character of the neighborhood and the street, which is an interesting argument. You know, I would argue that garages are not the most attractive and aesthetic, you know, construction, and yet they are there in all our houses, and we are used to them, right? So we don't object to them, but often they're not you know, an attractive piece of building.
Was the final city ordinance that was enacted, was that a compromise solution? I mean, in other words, did the neighbors try and argue that you can only have panels on the backyard and not the side yard? And City Hall said, well, let's meet halfway and let's allow it both in the backyard and the side yards.
Yeah, the argument was really about the front yard. The opposition was to the front yard. So so it wasn't even a compromise. So there was no objection to solar panels on the backyard or the side yard. Now I'll tell you something interesting. So we've done a number of renovations to the house. Our house original main door was facing Broadman, the facing where the front yard. But with the renovations, the front door on that side of the house disappeared, and our front door is facing west. So I could have changed my address from Brockman to the side street, and my front yard would have become my side yard.
Right. And then it would have been legal.
And I could have put solar panels where I wanted them. So if I really wanted to fight, and if the tree wouldn't have come down, that would have been an option to me. But
Right.
fortunately, it didn't have to. I mean, it would have been, you know, it's not, you know, this whole thing, it was really, with the exception of a couple neighbors that we are very good friends with, 2 or 3 neighbors that we are very good friends in our immediate, a large portion of the neighborhood became rallied against the idea of having the solar panels, and a few of them remained sort of neutral, but the opposition was fairly strong. It was really interesting.
So how did you assess that? Are you talking about all the people that talked to you directly, or all the people that showed up at city council, or what are you measuring?
A number of ways. So the number of people that showed up city council, there were meetings there between the city council meetings. There were meetings in schools where city council members were invited, where to discuss this kind of citywide. So this thing got pretty big. So there were meetings, in schools in other areas of the city, where people were invited to discuss this.
Right, because the city was trying to make a global decision, not one just about your property.
Exactly. And, and I would go to all of these meetings and kind of try to argue my point of view. And, the other, parties would argue theirs. So
I got a question, Ernesto. Do you mind giving me your address? I could do a landscape look and take a look at your neighborhood. I'm a little familiar with Ann Arbor. Would you mind doing that? Or don't?
no, not at all.
Just curious.
Yeah, 2815 Brockman Boulevard.
Give that again.
2815 Brockman Boulevard. It's a house at the corner. It's a white house at the corner of Brockman and Stanley. Stanley's a little dead-end street.
Thank you.
What was your experience like in dealing with city officials? I mean, were they respectful? Were they sensitive to your situation? Because, Ann Arbor is an interesting city because they have very, very strong, very public goals about addressing climate change and reducing carbon pollution. And yet at the same time, here you're trying to do your bit, and you're trying to do it in a way that actually saves a beautiful tree initially. So you were trying to thread the needle, so to speak,
Right.
and which is consistent with Ann Arbor's goals. And yet ultimately you had to compromise your situation. And then one could also argue that, the hand of fate intervened with the lightning bolt. But how did you find, what was your experience like in dealing with City Hall? And the reason why I'm asking this question is that other people may have to deal with City Hall in the future. And I want you to kind of, share your experience and maybe puncture any balloons that people may have about dealing with City Hall.
Getting better.
I'm sorry, Robert? Yeah, the discussion was, we kept it very, very, very focused. So, of course, this thing was very emotional for me. I mean, I as you said, I was.
Well, we're going to say today is Thursday.
This was this was so dear to my heart. I mean, I'm a concerned, citizen, concerned about climate change, and frustrated that officials tend to do less than I think needs to be done, and I wanted to do my part. And it was frustrating and emotional not to have more support, and we've really kind of fought along, but it was respectful. I was frustrated that there was so little time to argue. I mean, they give you 2 minutes to make an argument at City Hall about this whole thing. So that was frustrating too. And so I was the only person. So I had 2 minutes, right? If there were 10 people arguing the other side, each one had 2 minutes. They had a long time. So it was, in that sense, it really wasn't fair that I really didn't have much much time to to make a fair argument. And there was a couple other people. There's a person that goes, I can't remember his name, that kind of goes to support solar enterprises, and showed up to all the meetings and show his support. But other than that, I was on my own dealing with this whole thing.
And I take it, when you made the argument that you're willing to build a fence around it and put a hedge around it, that still didn't, obviously, it wasn't persuasive.
That didn't dissuade anybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
RV, you're on mute.
I was just going to say, it sounds like it's very typical resistance to change, which is a very common sociological, psychological phenomenon that we all have. And when it piles up because you have multiple neighbors scared because something's going to change and they don't know what it's going to be like, and their children might touch the solar panel or whatever, their property values may change, all of these kind of fears. I'm really, I just want to express my sorrow that you went through that, because interestingly enough, where you have Lansing Power and Light is the source of electricity in Lansing and East Lansing, and that energy company supports people getting solar as opposed to DTE trying to get in the way of it, being very limiting as to how many panels you can put up and that kind of thing. So there's a context that's broader than even the city and your neighbors. So I just wanted to introduce that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The other, and I'm sure you guys may know more about this. The other thought that I had all along is that really the ideal solution in my mind was what I call is the idea of community solar, right? Where my panels don't need to be on my roof. that the panels can be in a community area where I own them, I earn the credits, I make my contribution, and it's but they are in an area where they're not it's possible for many people to have solar panels. I mean, I'm sure that you guys know that you look at Ann Arbor and how many houses really have a decent option to put solar panels.
Exposure to the sun.
Yeah, it's very limited.
So what I hear you saying is it would be nice if you could have your panels on the roof of Slauson.
Yeah, absolutely. Or at the airport, the Ann Arbor Airport, right? Or so many places, or along the side of a farmer, field that doesn't use it and can rent the space. And
right.
We all pay a little bit to.
So do we know if something like that is happening anywhere around here?
Well, let me just interject. GLREA is very supportive of community solar. And if DTE and Consumers Energy wanted to support exactly what Ernesto was talking about, then they could do it immediately. A third-party developer could build a solar farm. Ernesto could buy 10 panels or 15 panels, and then he could use the investment tax credit to reduce the cost. The IRS says that's perfectly fine. And then the energy that those panels generate would be credited back to Ernesto's bill wherever he lives within DTE's jurisdictional turf. But since DTE and consumers don't want to do that voluntarily, we're working to enact legislation to establish this policy as something that the utilities must do. And frankly, a number of states have had to do this as well. And I think it's Minnesota that's got a very strong community solar statute. maybe Wisconsin. I get those two states mixed up. But nonetheless, there is a couple of bills, one by a Democrat, I think Rachel Hood from Grand Rapids, and then Michelle Hoytiga, I think, is the other one. And she's a Republican from the Cadillac area. And there's been a coalition that's been built up to support the establishment of community solar. And we're hoping to get hearings on the bill in the House Energy Committee in September or October. So, but we've got to overcome utility opposition, frankly, because it all goes back to what I think Harvey mentioned maybe earlier, that the utilities are trying to hold on to their business model of being the sole distributors and generators of energy. And we want to change that. And we want to empower homeowners and small business, even large business, if they want to establish their own solar systems, they ought to be allowed to. And so that's something that we're working on. And I couldn't agree more with what Ernesto was saying, that we would like to see.
Right, and I could see something like, I could buy a share in AT&T or Apple or Tesla. I don't have to live near there. Theoretically, there could be a system where I could buy X number of shares in DTE, and they could be somehow mobile. So if I move to Texas, or I move to California, or I move to consumers power area from DTE, that it would all be transferable. I'm still the owner, and I get the benefits wherever I am.
No, I agree, Harvey, absolutely. And I have a fond dream that when a child graduates from college or graduate school, as a graduation present, I could see parents buying a dozen solar panels for their children at a solar farm. And no matter where that son or daughter lives, as long as it's within DT's turf, that power would follow them wherever they went, whether it's an apartment or a condominium or their first home. And to me, that would be a wonderful graduation present.
But I'm suggesting it could be nationalized.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Wherever they go outside of DTE, they could still follow them.
And complementary to that, I mean, if you're not so accommodated, you can buy one panel this year, and you can buy another panel next year, and incrementally, grow your solar array. So I think it's a model that it would be so wonderful to see implemented sometime.
No, that's right, Ernesto, because part of the challenge is that paying for the full upfront cost of a solar system for a lot of low and moderate income people, it might be a kind of a heavy cash flow lift.
Right.
And so what you're suggesting would make it's a form of what I call renewable energy justice, that we need to make the renewable energy transition available to everybody in Michigan. And community solar really is the key element that we need to enact and make happen. So.
Yeah.
Right. I look at the solar panel bought one at a time. You're extending the heavy cost of installation, where you got a crew and they're putting up one panel, as opposed to a crew putting up, you have over 20. So to me, it seems like doing some kind of financing where they would pay interest, et cetera, and be able to pay over time and get all the panels at once would probably be a better model than trying to buy one this year and one next year and that kind of.
I don't imagine it that way, right? What would happen is that, if that there's a solar farm that is growing organically, right? And if 50 people buy one panel, then then you install 50 solar panels in one swap. I mean, the point you make is a good one, but I think there's ways to kind of work around it to make it efficient.
Right. That's what I would look for. I mean, in other words, my interest would be in helping the low and middle income individuals to put up the full array that they desire, find a way to make that, as you say, efficient.
No, that's right. And Dave Friedrichs of Homeland Solar, whom I used to work for, Ernesto, years ago, he came up with an expression, pay as you save. And his big argument was, and it makes sense, that if you don't have the money to pay for the full upfront, if you can borrow money from Michigan Saves at a modest interest rate, if your loan payment is less than what your utility bill used to be under DTE, then you're going to start saving money immediately by putting up solar. You won't save as much because you have to pay the interest payment on the money to pay for the installation of the panels. But when you pay off the loan, 6, 7, 8 years, then you'll start saving a lot more money. But in the interim few years, you'll start saving some money, but you'll save even more down the roads. The key is that you got to make sure the loan payment is less than what the previous bill was. And what's interesting is that every year, both DTE and Consumers Energy are raising their rates. And so the cost to residential homeowners is keep going up every year. And so you can figure out how much you will save right now based upon today's rates, but you're going to save even more money. Or another way of putting it is that the time it takes to pay off your loan will be reduced as time goes on, because your neighbor are going to be paying more money for electricity because DTE keeps raising the rates, whereas you're already getting the energy from your solar system. And so your income expenditure, your energy expenditures will be flat. They're not going to change at all. So.
Right. I've got one other formula to put on there. The Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation has millions of dollars that they give away to nonprofits and worthy causes. And if Ann Arbor as a whole decided that we want to have lots more investment in individual houses having solar or community solar, however it plays, that maybe, in keeping with what's Ann Arbor's program, zero something or other. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
zero carbon footprint.
Yeah. But so Ann Arbor's already declared we're on a path and we're doing things to support that over the next 10 years or whatever. And if the whole city was looked at as, all right, we're going to find a way to get the Ann Arbor Community Foundation and maybe other entities to help put solar panels in place and get some of these paybacks, interest rates funded by these nonprofits in some way, we build the I'll call it the Ann Arbor footprint, the vantage point that people have about Ann Arbor goes up because we're doing a lot to end the dependency on carbon fuels.
Are there other questions from folks? I mean, Ernesto, maybe you can close out your screen so we could see everybody. I want to make sure before we wrap up, we give everyone else an opportunity to ask any questions or perfect, or to make any comments.
I'll wait a little bit.
No, go ahead. I mean, I think.
So I was going to ask you, so in this vision where community solar takes off and it becomes a viable option for people to provide their own energy, what would be the role then of DTE or companies like DTE?
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, the utility model or the role of the investor-owned utilities is evolving. And I think some utilities are embracing the future quicker than others in the sense that they're reevaluating the role they play. I think that I don't think we need to worry about the utilities losing that many customers, because with the acceleration of people buying electric cars, that represents, I heard a statistic a couple years ago that if all the cars in Michigan became electric cars, that would require a 25% increase in the capacity of generating electricity in the state, 25% more than we currently have right now. So for every person that installs solar, which takes a little bit of business away from DTE, there's still going to be a lot of people who may never get solar, but are going to buy an electric car. And so their demand for electricity is going to go up. And then the second thing that's happening is that there's a big national push, and obviously California is kind of leading the way, that they want to try and electrify the heating of people's homes too, to get away from natural gas being the primary fuel source for heating homes. Because even though natural gas produces less carbon than burning coal, it still produces a lot more carbon than electricity generated from renewable energy resources. And so there is going to be a growth in the demand for electricity. So I don't think we have to worry about the health of the utilities. But to answer your question specifically, I think there's always going to be a need for someone to manage the grid, because the grid is still a very important connective piece of infrastructure. And if you've been following what's happened in both New Orleans as well as in Detroit, that these storms caused the grid to go down and lots of people lost power. And so now there's all this discussion about how we have to manage the grid more effectively. We have to make the grid more resilient. We have to bury power lines. We have to have more battery backup. So I think the utilities could very easily have competition for generation of energy, whether it's from individuals or community solar or whatever, but they're still going to have a role in managing the grid. And so, and of course, everybody that has solar who don't have a battery system, we need the grid as a backup, you know, in the months of December and January and February, where we can get a string of cloudy days. And we all know that we have to pay to maintain the grid. But the issue has always been, what is the fair amount that solar owners should pay to maintain the grid? And because again, all that extra electricity that Ernesto is putting back on the grid during the summer months, you know, there's real value to that. And the utilities gain a benefit from having access to that extra solar electricity that they turn right around and sell at the full retail rate. And they don't have to bring on their peak power plants as a result. So we just need to figure out what the real value of solar is and figure out how much we need to pay for the grid that's fair and everyone's paying their fair share. Any other questions or comments? Thomas, you look as though you want to say something. You're on mute, Thomas.
Here we go. Yes, I was wondering if Ernesto or anyone else who's contemplating moving after they have their solar system installed has gotten any feedback from real estate professionals about the impact of that on the desirability of the home or the sale price of the home, things like that.
Yeah, the real estate that we work with from Real Estate One told us that it can go both ways.
Yeah.
It can be an asset, and there's people that get turned off by the idea of having solar in their homes.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I mean, my sense is that it added to the value of the house, but I have no way of proving it. I mean,
well, but there have been studies done. The National NREL, part of the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, they've done studies in Arizona and California the last 4 or 5 years. And they have shown that property value has in fact gone up with people that have installed solar systems versus those that don't have solar systems. And I think it's very commonsensically intuitive, because if you have a solar system and you buy a house that has it already built on, you're going to save a ton of money from having to pay a utility bill versus your neighbor, again, who is seeing the cost of energy keep going up every year. And so there has to be an increase in property value that reflects that. GLREA understands this is the problem, and we have to educate realtors, and we have to, kind of help these professionals understand how to evaluate these new types of homes that have solar on the roof or are in fact net zero energy, where they're so well insulated that you don't lose a lot of heat, you don't waste energy, and that has to be reflected in the market value of homes. Dale, you got a question or a comment? Go ahead, sir.
So I was wondering if anybody knows anyone who has moved since they've been on distributed generation. If you have a credit bank, or like it'd be dollars credit on your bill, whether that's been refunded when you stopped your electric service. Kind of like the question about if you move, will your house still get to stay net metered for the remaining part of the time? What happens with the any bank that you have built up on distributed generation? I know when you end net metering, or when you change the rate plans, any value of kilowatt hours that you had banked up, they convert that to dollars at whatever the rate was, and that goes as a direct credit on your bill. But I'm wondering about the same idea, but with distributed generation.
Mm-hmm. I don't have the answer to your question, Dale. And what I think I'm going to recommend to John Sarver is I think it's high time we invited Julie Baldwin back on Solar Stories, because these are some really good questions that, as the solar industry is starting to mature a little bit in Michigan, where we got more and more people that are buying it, and now they're selling their homes, like Ernesto and Harvey are talking about. And then Dale, your scenario is a ripe one too. And I think maybe Julie, who is in charge of the renewable energy section of the Public Service Commission, I think she might be able to help us with some of these questions. Kate, you got a question or a comment?
Yes, I have, from Ernesto's your
Can
solar
we see
story.
you?
No,
Okay, go ahead.
wait a minute. I'm in my pajamas. Okay, how's that?
It's perfect.
Okay. What percentage have you, in selling your house or whatever, it seems to me you could say, excuse me, what percentage your utilities you have saved by when you switched over to solar?
It's hard for me to say, because we also added, so we had the solar panels. So we've also added electric cars. So at the same, so where consumption of electricity has gone up quite a bit. We've had 2 electric cars.
Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, which has been, it's such a pleasure, to have your car in the garage and know that the electricity is going straight from the roof into that battery. I mean, it's a wonderful experience.
Yes.
But yeah, and I didn't say it, but before we put the panel, the house was foam insulated throughout. So I knew that made more sense than putting solar panels. What's the point of putting solar panels if all your energy is going out the window, right?
Right.
So
I did the same thing. I put foam in all the walls.
yeah, I mean, and so the efficiency of the house increased. So it's hard for me to tell you really what percentage. There's been so many moving parts and
Yes.
that, um,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
But the comparison is available. In other words, you have X square feet of house and you've got 2 cars running, and you could compare that to the same, 1,000 houses that have the same square footage and 2 cars. You know what I mean?
True.
So it's available. It doesn't have to be you that figures it all out.
Right.
Yes, but it's a good selling point still.
Right. Any other final questions or comments? It's about 2 minutes before our time is up.
Yeah, just this, Tom again. What was it the Lawrence Livermore Lab that does this, these annual studies?
Yeah, it's National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, and it's a part of the Lawrence Berkeley Lab. You can just Google them. And they've done studies in California, in Arizona. The challenge has been in Michigan is that we just haven't had enough solar. This is going back a year or so. We haven't had enough solar installs in Michigan to have enough homes to be able to do this kind of analysis. But we're getting to the point where I think we can pretty soon. California and Arizona have had a fair amount of sales. And so these types of studies, the market impact of homes with solar is being analyzed. Okay, well, Ernesto, thank you so much, sir, for coming on Solar Stories, Ann Arbor Solar Stories, and sharing your situation. This has been a great discussion as always. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I want to thank our sponsors, the Michigan Energy Office, McNaughton and McKay, Iron Ridge Racking, and Harvest Solar. And I want to encourage all of you who, if you're not already a member of GLREA, become a member. Just go on our website, GLREA, and look under the membership tab and scroll down and click on the green button that says become a member. And our dues are just $30 a year, and they're tax deductible because we're a nonprofit. And stay tuned for our solar story next Thursday. I think Mark Clevey is going to be our host. And I think it will be a clean energy seminar, which is a variation of a solar story. It's on some issues associated with renewable energy. So thanks again, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. And again, thank you so much, Ernesto, for sharing your story with us.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
John.
night, everybody.
Thank you for inviting me and allowing me to share my experience.
Thank you, Ernesto.